It's been a long day, right? No fresh air, but we asked them to leave the lights up so at least we aren't in full snooze mode. Is that okay? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about some things about entrepreneurs, which I was one a long time ago, and when I left the world of entrepreneurship to become a professor, I wanted to learn about entrepreneurs from the academic point of view, and I discovered there'd been a whole lot of work done in the 80s and 90s about what makes entrepreneurs different from peers, not peers, but others in the business world that aren't entrepreneurs. And all of that research led to a research conclusion that said we can't find any differences. And yet I know in my heart, and I've seen with my own eyes, that there are fundamental differences. So a couple of years ago, I set out to figure out, well, can we figure out what's really different about entrepreneurs? And it turns out there are 6 things that actually are different, and they are different, and they make entrepreneurs fundamentally different creatures than your colleagues back home. So I'm here to talk to you just a bit about these 6 differences and see if I can bring them to life, and more importantly, see if I can give you some tools to put them to work in your part of the business to make it grow faster. Okay, now I call these the counter-conventional mindsets of entrepreneurs, and I call them counter-conventional because they run counter to all the big practices, the best practices, the things we know we should do that we've learned to do over 40 years in big companies to make them work well. And they also fly in the face of stuff we teach in business schools like mine about how to run a great company. Okay, so what am I talking about here? I said mindsets. So a mindset, what's a mindset? Well, here's what a mindset is. It's this stuff that exists upstairs here, a collection of beliefs and attitudes and habits that predetermines what we do when something comes our way, an event, a circumstance, a situation. These mindsets that we have lock us into actions that follow from what comes our way. So I'm going to explore with you here in 20 minutes or so these 6 mindsets. And the first one is what I call yes, we can. And so if you think about big business and how it works, we've learned that what you're supposed to do in your businesses is stick to your knitting, right? And you build on these core competencies and you nurture them and make them better and stronger and more robust. And when somebody comes along and says, can you do X? And it sits outside that set of competencies, what are you supposed to say? No, we're not going to do that, right? We stick to our knitting. Well, what do you think entrepreneurs say when that happens? Sure, I can do that. And then they go, holy cow, how the hell am I going to deliver on that? But that's what they do. So this guy, Arnold Correa, in Sao Paulo, got his start running Domingueiras. And a Domingueira is a party, a big Sunday party for young people with music and dance and all kinds of fun. And that's what he did for a living when he was in college to make some extra money. Well, he decided that that wasn't a sufficient occupation to take him where he wanted to go career-wise, but he said, I'm pretty good running events. I'm going to see if I can run corporate events. And he got some business with McDonald's in Brazil, and then he got some business with Walmart. And one event he was asked to run, he was running the event, but another company was supposed to video the event. Well, the other company canceled the day before, so Walmart called him up and said, Arnold, our video guy just canceled. Can you do it? And what do you think he said? Yes, we can. Holy cow, I've never shot a video in my life. I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to shoot. But he called his network, and he found somebody who could do the video. He found him in a cemetery, it turned out, because it was the Day of the Dead, a big religious holiday in Brazil. Some years later, he then said, well, you know, we're pretty good at producing these events, and we've learned to do this well, but we're not getting a big share of our customers' wallet. And so we need something else to make our business grow. And he went to the US and he saw what Walmart, one of his good customers, was doing in the US to innovate. And Walmart was doing something called corporate TV, where Walmart executives in the US or in headquarters in Brazil would broadcast in real time sales motivations and updates on the company and all kinds of things and training programs delivered from headquarters to all the locations in Brazil, which is a very large country. You can't travel around and do that face to face. Well, that reinvented his business again, but he discovered that when he had to do that, he needed satellite capability, which he didn't have. The internet wasn't good enough in those days to stream video. He needed to be able to install stuff all over the country, and he'd only done stuff in Sao Paulo previously, and it was going to take some money that he didn't have. But he figured out how to do it. Again, yes, we can. And then 5 years after that, he said, you know, we just got through the financial crisis, the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9, unscathed. It almost took him down, and he said, you know what? If you're on the expense side of the P&L, it's too easy to cut. And we get cut out of budgets when we're on the expense side. I want to be on the revenue side of my customer's operation. And he went to the US again, and he saw what was happening there, and he said, you know, there's this thing called digital out-of-home TV, where Walmart is putting TV screens in the customer part of the store, not just in the trading room. So when you walk down the detergent aisle, for example, you find an ad running on a television for Procter & Gamble's detergent. Okay? He said, well, let's see, could I do that? Yeah, maybe yes, I think we can, but I need to learn how to license content because we've only done these custom events. We need to get people to learn how to sell advertising in stores. We've never done any of that, but yeah, I think we can do that. Today, Atmo Digital, his company, is the biggest digital out-of-home provider in Brazil, and it all started with these Sunday parties back when he was in college and was saying, yes, we can, 3 times. Okay, the second one I want to talk to you about is this one. It grows out of what I think many of your companies do. In fact, I was talking at lunch to one of you about this. Big companies think about their products, and they think about them a lot. And we just heard about Tetra Pak, and what did we hear about? The products that Tetra Pak makes and how to change them. Well, I've been a consumer, my family's been a consumer of Tide detergent. I think it's Ariel here. And, you know, over the years, Tide has put green speckles into the detergent to make it fresher. And then they put scent in to make it smell better. And then they take the green speckles out and put blue ones in, and they call it innovation. Is this innovation? We have Coke, New Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Natural. What are we going to get next? Coke what? I don't know. And then I was in the US last summer, and there's a cheese snack cracker called Cheez-Its. I'm sure you guys don't know what they are, but they're really tasty. And guess what? Cheez-Its has decided to put grooves in the Cheez-Its. Isn't that exciting? Can you imagine having Cheez-Its with grooves in them? Well, there's all this product-first focus, but that's not what entrepreneurs do. They don't think about the product first. They think about the problem first. So this guy, John Thorne, a former student of mine, had developed some technology that enabled electrosurgical instruments not to stick to human tissue. And you can imagine that a surgeon who uses electrosurgical instruments like probes and forceps to do their stuff, when those instruments stick to tissue, that's maybe not so good. So if a plastic surgeon is using one of these tools and it sticks to the tissue, the finished result might not look so nice, you know, as they intended. Well, John bought that technology that he had developed as a contractor for a big company that decided not to pursue it in its original form. He licensed it, and then he said, well, where can I find a problem? And the problem he found was with neurosurgeons. So imagine you're a neurosurgeon and you're doing brain surgery, or worse, or better, imagine you're the patient of that brain surgery and the guy's using forceps to work on your brain. Do you want to have him have a few extra cells stick to the device? I don't think we do, right? We don't want sticking brain cells and losing them. So John's impetus for creating this great company, Silverglide Surgical Technologies, was to find a problem, solve that problem with superior technology. He sold the business several years later, and his shareholders are very, very happy. But again, not because they started with a product, but because they started with a problem. So the next one of these mindsets is this thing about how widely we think about new products and new markets. So in your companies, I suspect, when you guys propose something new you'd like to do, the committee through which your good idea has to pass wants to make sure it's going to move the needle, right? The market's got to be big enough, your sales forecast has to be high enough, and it has to pass whatever the criteria are for market share, market size, revenue, return on investment, whatever your metrics are. Okay? So we got to make sure it's going to move the needle. But for entrepreneurs, they don't care about moving the needle, at least not at the beginning. So we heard from Nike this morning. I don't know if you know the origin of Nike. Nike's initial target market, back quite a long time ago now, was elite distance runners who could run pretty much a 4-minute mile. How large is that target market, guys? Do we have any 4-minute milers in the room? Can I see a show of hands if everybody can run a 4-minute mile? I don't see a lot of hands. Okay. But what's the message here? Once you focus on a problem that you know intimately, and Phil Knight and his partner Bill Bowerman knew this target market intimately because Knight himself was almost, but not quite, a 4-minute miler. And Bill Bowerman, his coach, was always tinkering with his runners' shoes. How can I give them better shoes to have better race times? Well, it turns out that there weren't shoes at that time made explicitly for distance runners as opposed to all runners. So sprinters, when they train, they just run around the track. But is that what a distance runner does when he trains? No, he doesn't. He or she doesn't. They run on country roads, and they're always stepping on sticks and rocks and stepping into rodent holes. So they have a lot of ankle sprains. And because of all of that pounding for the many miles they train, they need more cushioning in the shoes. So Knight and Bowerman said, okay, we need shoes that are better cushioned to avoid all the shin splints. We need shoes that are wider in the footbed so we don't get as many ankle sprains. And by the way, wouldn't it be nicer if they were lighter weight? Because fewer ounces in the shoe means less work for the runner and hence faster race times. Well, it took 5 years before Phil Knight could quit his day job as an accountant and start working full-time for Nike. But as we know, that business has done okay, right? First there were distance runners, then there's all runners, then there's John McEnroe in tennis, and then there's Michael Jordan in basketball, and so it's gone. So when you start with a narrowly defined problem in a narrowly defined target market and master that one, you're probably going to learn some things about how you can then take some bigger steps into other markets. So what did they learn? They learned how to source shoes in Asia. They learned how to get elite athletes to endorse their product. They learned all kinds of things about how you make, market, and build shoes. That led from one thing to another, and of course, Nike is the global leader in that category today. But it all started with this tiny little market that was no way going to move anybody's needle, at least not at the outset. Another one, ask for the cash and ride the float. So big companies have a lot of cash. Merck in 2018, as you can see on the screen, spent $18 billion giving money back to its shareholders through stock buybacks and dividends. They only spent $10 billion on R&D. Is something wrong here? It doesn't seem quite right. And you guys, as you try and build innovative things in your companies, it's really tough to get them done, but it's probably not that tough to get the cash to get them done if you can do all the rest of it. Because people in big companies typically aren't incentivized on cash. They're incentivized on profit or sales or things like that, or margin, but not on cash. For entrepreneurs, though, it's different. For an entrepreneur, cash is the lifeblood of the business. If you run out of cash, it's a really, really bad day, guys. I can tell you, I've been there. So what do you need? You need to make sure you always have cash, and don't worry so much about all those other things. Well, to everybody's surprise, Elon Musk has built a cash-first business. So the first car that Musk developed, Musk and his partners, was a roadster. They had no cash. Musk had made a lot of cash, but he was careful about how much cash he wanted to put into Tesla. So he said with his partners, let's go see if we can sell some roadsters before we build them. And so they did a road show in California of high net worth, environmentally conscious people, and they managed to sell 100 roadsters for $100,000 per roadster in cash before they built Roadster number 1. Do the math. That's $10 million in cool cash before you start building the cars. Well, he's continued that process ever since, and when the Model 3 was developed now a few years ago, 500,000 people put $1,000 down. Do the math there. $500 million before the very first Model 3 ever went into production. So there's this myth that Tesla is a big venture capital funded company, and indeed they did raise some venture capital, but at the heart of this business is getting the customers cash up front, riding the float that gives you. Use that cash to do all the other things you need to do, and the business will take care of itself. Next, beg, borrow, but please don't steal. So we teach our students in finance that when you have something you want to do that's new, you have to invest, right? You have to maybe build a new plant. I was in the retailing industry. You have to build a new store, maybe a prototype store. And you got to figure out the investment it's going to take, and then you forecast the cash flows, and you calculate ROI. And if the ROI meets the hurdles, off you go and you do the project. Well, for entrepreneurs, there's a much, much better way to go. It's called begging or borrowing the assets you need. So I don't know if any of you have been on a Go Ape ropes course in the UK. Anybody ever been on a Go Apes course? It's really cool, right? So these guys, Tristram and Rebecca, have built a treetop adventure experience, zip lines, Tarzan swings, all that kind of stuff. And they borrowed the trees, and they borrowed the parking, and they borrowed the restrooms. They borrowed the whole thing because they discovered that the best source of trees in the UK where you could put these things was Forestry Commission sites. So they went to the Forestry Commission, and they said, you know, you guys would like to have more visitors in your forest sites. We have an idea. We'd like to build Go Ape treetop adventures in your sites. You've got the parking, you've got the restaurants, you've got the loos, you've got all this stuff. We'll build a treetop adventure, and that means we don't have to have telephone poles and all the other stuff that everybody else in that industry uses. Well, they struck a deal with the Forest Service that if they could build 6 units in the first 5 years, the Forest Service would then give them an exclusive that would last 26 years. What does that do to your competition, guys? It keeps them out. They borrowed the trees, borrowed the sites, borrowed the loos, and they built a phenomenal business. If you get to the UK and you want to have a nice day in some trees, I urge you to go. It's really fun. And then finally, the last one of these is this one. So we know what Travis Kalanick and his partner Garrett Camp have created at Uber, right? But did he ask permission to go start running Uber cabs in any markets? No, he didn't, because what would have happened had they asked for permission from the regulators? Can we run Uber cabs in San Francisco, their first market? What do you think would have happened? I think we know what would have happened. The industry lobbyists would have said, oh, no, we can't have this, and they wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So what entrepreneurs do is they don't worry about having big armies of lawyers to figure out whether it's legal. Now, I'm not suggesting you should break laws here, but often the laws don't contemplate what an entrepreneur wants to do in a new or different way, especially with all the digital innovation we have today. And so what Colonic did is they just said, well, let's just open. And they started Uber Cab, as it was called in the early days, and a black car would show up once you clicked on your app, and you could ride like a millionaire, as Colonic used to put it. Well, the authorities didn't like it, and neither did the cab industry, and so they got subpoenaed, and they were told to make a whole bunch of changes, but the only change they made was to take Uber Cab and call it Uber. They took cab out of the name. Okay, so now we know it as Uber, right? Well, we know what's happened to Uber. All these cities, one after another around the world, Uber just enters, and then he worries about, what should I do about the regulators? We'll worry about that later. Okay. Now, did they do some nasty stuff along the way? They did. I don't applaud that. I think Colonic's ethics aren't what yours and mine ought to be. But there's an interesting story there about how you don't need to ask permission to do things. Go get it done. And if you need to ask forgiveness later, maybe that's okay. Okay, so I want to close with some questions for you. And I have 3 questions I want to ask you. Here's question 1. Is there one of these 6 mindsets that's already part of how you think and act in your business? Maybe there is. Question number 2. Are these things teachable? And could you teach them to the people who work for you? And then question 3. Is there one of these that you could learn to apply today or tomorrow or Monday when you get back to work to a challenge you currently face? And that's what we're going to actually work on in the 2 labs I'm running, one of them tomorrow afternoon after lunch and another one on Wednesday morning. We're going to work on putting one or more of these ideas to work in your business to solve a challenge you face now. Okay, now it turns out there's a really good book on this topic. You can tell it's a really good book because it's got my name at the bottom of the cover. It's based on 20 years of in-depth case study research. As I said, these mindsets run counter to what your colleagues back home think is the right thing to do. They fly in the face of what we teach in business schools like mine. If I had books to give you, they'd be on your tables, but the book will be published in January, so I can't give them to you today. I apologize. But what you can do is go to Amazon, Amazon Anywhere, Brazil, whatever, and you can pre-order one. You'll get it in January. Okay, so it looks like we've got 7 or 8 minutes left. I'm happy to stop, answer some questions, and we'll see where we go here. And then I'll see you tomorrow. So, do we have some questions? And by the way, these mics are meant to throw. Did you guys know that? So let's throw them and have some fun, right? We need some energy. There we go. Okay, good catch. Question.
Hello, John. Considering that in this cohort, most of us are from large corporations.
Yes, I know.
Banking on your experience, which one of these 6 do you see is the biggest pitfall for big corporations?
So the question is, which of these 6 mindsets is the biggest potential pitfall if used in big companies? I think it's the one about not asking permission. Okay. Now, there are 2 sides to that in a big company. If you have to ask your boss permission to do anything, you're probably not going to last very long, especially in an innovation unit, right? But when the laws are maybe unclear, entrepreneurs are going to go ahead and try something and see if they can make it work. In a big company, maybe that's not a really good idea, right? Because there's an army of lawyers in your big company, just like there is in every other big company, and they're not going to be very happy if you're creating risks for the business. So I think that one, as I say in the last chapter in the book, that one maybe for big companies shouldn't be on top of the list. But all the other 5 work fine in a big company, and you can put them to use tomorrow. It's a great question. Thank you. Is there another one? Let's throw these boxes around. Did you catch it, or did she hand it to you?
No, she put it on the table.
Oh, come on.
I'm not a great player. Just to answer maybe the question he asked, I think there is another component that is one of the pitfalls of the large companies. The one where we focus on the product, not on the problem. We forget about, most of the time we forget about solving the problem and seeking the problem instead of pushing very hard our solutions and our product. I have another question. Among all what you described, where does the short-termism fit in all this? Because for the entrepreneurs, most of the time, they, as you said, they are focused on the cash. So it's kind of, where can I make money very quickly, because it's a survival question more than ever. But for the big or larger companies, it's also about making money by the end of the year. It's always about the EBITDA by the end of the year.
Exactly.
So where what you're saying, how can I say, fits or?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. I think there's a short-term quarterly earnings mentality driven by Wall Street, to be fair, that says you got to make your quarterly numbers. What I tell big companies that I work with is, look, let's take a small budget and set it aside over here. That's the budget for experiments. And we do that consistently so that we don't have ups and downs in our quarterly earnings. So we set aside that budget, and some of you probably work under those budgets. And we set those aside, and we run experiments. And what do we expect to happen when we run an experiment, by the way? What happens with most experiments? They fail, but that's how we learn, right? So we run experiments, and we expect some of them to fail, but maybe some of them will succeed. So Nespresso, I think we all know Nespresso. There's a chapter of the book about Nespresso. Big company, much like yours, took a long time to get that product to be meaningful enough to move the needle, frankly. But today it's the fastest growing category in all of Nespresso. So yes, there's often a short-term mentality, but maybe it takes a little leadership from people like you guys to say, look, we don't have to do everything for this quarter. We can do some things that have long-run potential and give us a little budget to play around with those kind of things, and let's see where we go. It's a big problem, you're right. But I think it's one that can be solved. Do we have anybody else with another question where we can throw the little, the green box? Yeah, I see a hand over here. Can we throw a box that far? Oh, good throw. Okay, excellent.
Really love the 6 principles. Thank you very much. You know, just continuing the theme of questions around translating those into the corporate environment for entrepreneurship. I think for an entrepreneur, you know, the reward potentially outweighs the risks, which is great. You know, how do you see translating these or synthesizing the environment for an entrepreneur within a company? You know, manufacturing that environment of risk upsides, encouraging people to embody these principles and be an entrepreneur within large corporates. How do you see creating that environment to enable these principles to flourish in a corporate environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think we have to change the entire corporate environment to make entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, if we want to call it that, flourish. I think you can change the environment in the part of the business that you run, and you can create that culture of being more entrepreneurial in your unit. And by the way, when you begin to succeed at that, and then people get promoted out of your unit because it's worked, what happens to the culture? Those people take what they learn in your unit, and they begin to, may I say, infect the rest of the business with a little more action-oriented ethos. So it's easy for us to stand back and say, my company's too conservative, I can't do any of this stuff. But can you say, yes, we can, if a customer wants something new that doesn't stick to your knitting? I think we can. Can we focus on problems instead of products? I think we can. Can we think narrowly about target markets at the outset, as Nespresso did really early on, instead of looking for things that are going to move the needle tomorrow. Yeah, I think we can do these things, right? But whose gift is it to do these things? It's yours, and yours, and yours, and yours. It's all of our gift to make these things happen within what we control. Okay? You're not going to change the culture today, but you may well end up changing the culture over the long term. I think it's a long-term game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But if we don't start running, we're never going to get to the finish line, right? Okay, my clock says I'm out of time, so I better stop. I hope to see you in the labs tomorrow and on Wednesday.
Question. If there's one more question, we'll have it.
We have time? Axel, one more? Okay, is there one more? We don't have a record toss yet of the ball. That last toss went about 3 tables.
It's good. Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you all.